All right, Daddy, I've had a crazy morning, but I'm not letting myself go on my walk or continue with my own workout stuff until we talk about breathing. Let's get the lay of the land. This is the nature of breathing that we all need to be doing, but it's what I refer to in the McGill Big 3 video that you said you watched, and you now have one of his Bibles on back health. This underlies the principles he's talking about. For core stabilization, he's really talking about sort of the macro level, more superficial tissues of the core. What I like to describe as the tread on the tire. What we're going to work with today is the inner tube inside the tire to put some air in that sucker so that you can get better activation with the external muscles, and most importantly, to stabilize the spine on an intervertebral level, as opposed to the global stability of your spine that, again, the bigger muscles and his exercises, like his side plank stuff and his quadruped, all kinds of activities require and can help stimulate that type of strengthening, but very few things directly target this inner tube experience because it is geared to our respiration. All right, so step one, the reason I've been sort of loath to make you these videos is because it's so involved, and I want you to have the big picture, and I want you to make progress and not get frustrated. But no, it's not immediate, overnight, instantaneous results, and that it is a process. And I've been describing with my clients that it is like we are laying rows of bricks, and we want to let, unlike bricks probably, so we're laying, I don't know, Adobe clay blocks or something. We want to let each layer dry before we pile on, okay? We don't want a wobbly foundation. We don't want to leave any element of the foundational skills, the physical skills that you need to learn to get the benefits, like half-baked, okay? Or half-dried. So first things first is understanding mechanics. The basic mechanics of diaphragmatic breathing, which you said you understand from theater, right? And as a lot of singers will know at least some of these elements. But a singer or someone who's focused on projecting voice is sacrificing some of the air pressure to projecting sound that they could be harnessing for stabilizing their spine if they weren't talking, right? If they weren't talking, if they weren't singing, etc. So, no, it gets us halfway there, but then we need to figure out how to make that the physiological skill for a stable spine. So, looking at the anatomy, quick and dirty, we have the diaphragm itself, right? The diaphragm itself, which sits up in the rib cage, and upon inhalation, we actively draw it down. When we relax our diaphragm, we will exhale. But for human beings, unlike amphibians, I learned, we have to actively inhale. Now, there's more than one way to draw air in to our thoracic cavity that houses our lungs. One way, the optimal way, is using our diaphragm. We get massive more lung and oxygenation capacity, inhalation capacity, because we can really create a pressure difference between the thoracic and abdominal cavities, well, really, the thoracic cavity and the outside air, by pulling diaphragm down. It's suctioning, right? You're picturing like a syringe, for lack of a better visual. You're pulling down, and if that head of the syringe is in a liquid, for example, or if you're drawing in a gas, right? You're pulling in, and it is drawing in the outside air. Now, we can get some small amount of pressure differential by expanding our rib cage with our rib cage muscles. We have auxiliary muscles to respiration that are on the ribs, the abs, and you know, between the ribs, etc. I don't mean to diminish these muscles, they're important, but we don't want to rely on them. They do like sniffy, hyperventilatory, gaspy, like type of breath. They actually perform the type of breathing that we would do if we were like scared and listening and not wanting to breathing, you know, not in a rest and digest state. They are for high alert states. So not only are they when the body's like, I don't have the luxury of a nice, you know, expansive inhale and exhale. They are for specific moments when we want our nervous system high revved. So those go together. The relationship between the conscious and the subconscious nature of breath, right, taps into our nervous system as well. And part of the benefit, in particular thinking about hypertension, part of the benefit of controlling your breath and down regulating out of the rib cage breathing, the mechanical fact of rib cage breathing, right, we'll call it, it's also called axial breathing because you're just barely expanding those ribs, a fraction of the percentage of capacity that diaphragm can pull in air, but that's what you're doing, is you're expanding the rib cage a little bit, 15%, and getting a little bit of air and just coasting on that. Okay. But in addition to that being inefficient for respiration, it's also just massively dysregulating our hormones, which also contributes to hypertension, right? The stress level cycle, the stress cycle. So we're going to put that aside and look at that as a huge side benefit. Okay, it's a side benefit that is at least as big as the main course, or it's a side dish that's at least as big as the main course, but it's not our focus of today. But it is going to come along with the physical, mechanical, spinal stability supportive method of breathing that we're going to do today. Okay, so getting back to our diaphragm. My concern with a lot of videos, and the reason I don't have a video to send you to, because I'd love to send you to an expert that you would believe in, that had lots of letters after her or his name. I don't have one of those because the experts aren't teaching the shit. They might, they're not even all describing it well. To be quite honest, in my assessment, having studied a whole bunch of them, cross-referenced a whole bunch of them, and distilling the cream of the crop, I'm learning they just don't, they all have blind spots. They all have emphases and facies that they're mixing up, right? And misleading people, I think, really problematically. They're not really understanding their audience, and they also have blind spots. So they just fully don't address things. There's plenty of people teaching diaphragmatic breath that don't even mention the pelvic floor. That's like, that is impossible. That is an impossible fact, but I will just leave the dissertation on that. But it's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous omission, and it's really a problem because a lot of people have very dysfunctional pelvic floors, and they don't know it, right? But just look at how popular adult diapers are, and you know people have massively dysfunctional pelvic floors, erectile dysfunction, so all types of incontinence, hemorrhoids, hip pain, pelvic pain of all kinds. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of evidence for it. Also things like varicose veins and acid reflux, all related to this mechanical system. And I'm saying that because we have a real problem that people don't know this, but it's because the parties that have an investment in talking about the different musculature, like who's talking about pelvic floor, who's talking about diaphragm, who's talking about postural muscles, who's talking about abs, everyone wants to talk about the core, but what the fuck are they talking about? They're not talking to each other, and so an individual who happens to possess all of these parts doesn't know how they work together. Okay, so let's get to the instruction manual. Diaphragm needs to come down. Pelvic floor yields to diaphragm. Diaphragm sits here up in the rib cage, attaches to the bottommost ribs. There's a whole bunch we could say about the attachment and the relationship to other organs. Again, keep it simple for now. Diaphragm comes down as far as you can draw it. Pelvic floor distends, right, as far as it can be pressed. That is eccentrically loading diaphragm. That is what it's supposed to do. It is supposed to take the weight of gravity in our internal organs and the pressurization from our respiration, right? And they work in this beautiful cylinder. This rhythm is what we interrupt when we breathe with our ribs, okay? And when we get off onto a detour of breathing with our ribs, not only does diaphragm atrophy, right? And there's all cascading effects of what it means to not just be moving diaphragm, okay? Our body is beautifully designed. It's like, oh, these humans, they'll never stop breathing. We can make this sort of the precipitating event for a number of things that they need in their body because they'll never stop breathing. So it's a great, it's secure, it's insurance for a bunch of things like their hip stability and their spine stability, their ability to walk, their shoulders, their neck, all this stuff. No, we fucked it all up. Their feet. All right, so pelvic floor has an excursion based on diaphragm's descent. Number one. And we're just going to stop there today, okay? But let me tell you a few more pieces of the puzzle because that's not the end goal. That is a first step. That is a means to an ends, okay? The ends we're going for is diaphragm moves, pelvic floor yields, and on either the inhale or the exhale, the pressurization of that cavity in the cylinder of transversus abdominis, which is the inner tube that I was talking about inside the bike tire. Not the tread, the inner tube. The one you put the air in that gives the tire integrity. Okay, the tire itself, the tread, is not useful to you without the inner tube. So first input I need for a strong supported wheel is the air pressure coming in, but then I also need a robust inner tube. I need it to be the right amount of elasticity, not too distended, not too soft, not with certain parts that are worn thinner than others. I need it to have nice uniform consistency so that it can absorb and pressurize as evenly as possible. We want something very similar for our body. As it turns out, our inner tube does not have symmetrical with rubber the full way around. It's thinner in the front, okay? So the path of least resistance for pressure when you breathe in is into the belly, right? And we talk about belly breathing, or people will talk about belly breathing. That's me inhaling. You notice my ribs didn't move, my shoulders didn't move, my belly expanded. All the dispersion, all of the displacement of my internal organs as a result of diaphragm descending and pelvic floor yielding went here, essentially. Pelvic floor probably moved a little bit, but I lost a lot of capacity for pressurization by just pressing out into that one path of least resistance in the rubber. It's where the rubber is the thinnest. So I have all these muscles to help me fortify that area of the cylinder so that I can pressurize to our target audience, which is my back, and also pelvic floor and my hips. The entire lumbo-pelvic complex, where your lumbar spine meets your sacral spine, meets your pelvic bowl, meets your hips, they all fascially interlink. They all fascially coordinate, and they require a tensioned stretch for stability. So, step one is overcoming the rib breathing, okay? Overcoming the rib breathing. And this is a big deal because this is a challenging thing. It's a challenging thing. So people will say, and we eventually want to say, we don't want to just breathe into our belly, but right now, today, let's just keep it easy for diaphragm. Let's not set up an obstacle course or make it more physically demanding for diaphragm to descend. So today, and maybe for a week or two, your goal is to just learn to breathe, maximally moving diaphragm and maximally moving pelvic floor, which will be a byproduct of that, and minimally breathing with your ribs. Now we got to talk about rib cage movement so that we really get the full package on this first step. It's not that we want the ribs to be a rigid box sitting at the top of your spine. That's not true. They absolutely move. They move in different ways, and they move in ways that are constructive for breathing, and they move in ways that hijack breathing. The way that hijacks breathing is when they're the first thing to move in this way that breaks the alignment of our spine, that disaligns the rib cage over the pelvis so that my cylinder is no longer stacked. When I breathe and breathe to the front like this, I rib flare. That's me heaving in to try to expand my rib cage. Many of us have a very flared rib cage. Here, diastasis, different types of hernias, result of just this flare here and the lack of muscular integrity holding those ribs down and holding us in alignment to pressurize appropriately. So step one is controlling your rib cage so that it doesn't hijack diaphragm. Because if we're used to breathing like in this hiccupy way, either some people lift, some people heave the ribs up, expanding them this way, and some people break at the front. And some people probably just get more creative than that. But that's the two most common ways that we see the ribs move in a way that intercepts diaphragm. Why do people do that? Asthma and different respiratory inflammation, right, potentially makes breathing hard. This, I believe, will be frustrating for you, and I don't want you to give up. I want you to power through, breathing slowly, being patient, noticing the relationship between calming your nervous system so that there's less spasm in your tissue. They are related. So you might have to be patient about this. You might have to pick when you do it, the environment you do it in, the time of day, when you are most at ease to facilitate the exercise. That's number one, is getting your ribs to stop doing the breathing for diaphragm. Okay? A couple ways you can help achieve this. One is just feeling the muscles it takes. Oh, and we got to get back to the appropriate ways your ribs should move when you breathe so that we have a clear distinction. But just to focus on this first, you might need to do things like hold your hands on your ribs or tie like an elastic band or a belt or something around your ribs so that you can feel them, because they're going to move reflexively and you're not going to feel it because it's your normal. Also, lying in bed, lying on something or on your back so that you actually feel your ribs lift or try to rise up on your spine like this. You'll feel it, you'll get the tactile feedback from the environment, from the surface, and that can help you correct it. But one thing that you can really just do is exhale hard from the rib cage, pulling the ribs down, closing this arch slightly, and then try to keep the ribs down as you take your next inhales. I have a lot of things I could say about this. I don't want you to feel like you have to grip your ribs down, right? But just as an exercise, as a means to control the ribs until you can start to train diaphragm to be stronger than the impulse to inhale with the ribs. Let's look at what appropriate ribcage movement is. Appropriate ribcage movement during diaphragmatic respiration, there's at least 3 points I want you to know about it. Number one is that it is very appropriate, healthful for the ribcage to expand outward, all right? Especially these bottommost ribs, they move in a pattern that's called bucket handle breathing. So if my arm is the bucket, you're actually, oddly enough, you are sitting, my tripod is sitting on a bucket, but therefore I cannot move it. But they lift like a bucket handle. The ribs that are not attached, like here at the sternum, the ribs that float down in the intercostal arch, they expand. It's incredible. You can feel it. It's magical to feel this going on in your body. It's this incredible. There's actually beautiful art models of the ribs moving. I'll send you one. So that's number one, is that the lowermost ribs have a bucket handle expansion of breath. Diaphragm is pulling on them, right? Diaphragm is pulling on them. Transversus abdominis is also pulling on them. It is different for the ribs to expand relative to each other than it is for the whole rib cage to lift forward or lift up. Different. We got to feel the difference, okay? It's not subtle, but there is a meaningful difference. So feeling your ribs expand, so if I do my belly breath again, which again, it's a means to an end. A means to an end is getting your belly to move tells you you're moving diaphragm, all right? So it's a means to then pressurizing your full cylinder, right? Step one. If I have my hands on my lowermost ribs and I breathe, I think you can see my elbows are moving because they're on my bottom ribs, but my axial skeleton is not shifting. So that's number one, is I want maximal bucket handle breathing of the lowermost ribs to the sides. Also, a beautiful way that the ribs will move is front to back expansion. This is very subtle. I don't even know if I'll be able to show you. A little bit. Do you see that my hand on my belly, hand on my belly, and the hand that's across my chest are both lifting, as opposed to, it's hard to do this performatively. That is just the hand on my chest lifting because my rib cage is gaspy, breaking the spinal alignment, and it's trying to sniff in air by expanding the rib cage just a little to draw in, to create that pressure differential to draw in. It's like the syringe can get 2 millimeters of air. It's a quick little bubble-filled pull-in of air. Not so nice, right? The former was my diaphragm is moving and my entire thoracopelvic cylinder is expanding in 3 dimensions, really. And therefore, my ribs, the front ribs, are lifting symmetrical as part of my entire core. That's why my belly and my back actually, although it's not like it's a huge movement, even if it's a very robust movement, it's not big, so it's not demonstrative, which is another reason people don't teach it, because it's hard to teach, because it's hard to see, it's hard to explain. Not us. Okay, so belly, breathing into my back, into the hand. And I'm corrupting my breathing a little to try to move my chest more. But the basic bottom line is that I want my ribs to expand to the sides, and I want my rib cage to expand to the front and back. If you're lying on your back, you will feel your ribs push into the mat slightly. Very slight, but you'll feel that pressure as the lungs expand and as the pressurization of the entire sort of support chambers, columns, down your back of your spine, right? That is created by the rib cage. Here's your spine, here's your rib cage, going down the back, right? Feel those chambers expand with the air pressure. That's where we're going. Even if today you do not feel that in a really meaningful way, it's likely because you're not able to get your diaphragm to move enough, and or it's all going to your belly right now because that's the path of least resistance for a not very strong diaphragm, but eventually we are creating the input environment to pressurize your back. So if you do feel stretch in your back, or even if you have low-key, like dull, fatigue, soreness, like you exercise those muscles, or you got a really kind of aggressive massage on those muscles, that's all a good sign, because it tells you from the inside you are moving tissue that isn't otherwise moving, okay? And even if you move it a little bit, you might get a lot of feedback from your brain about, oh, it's fatigued, it's mildly sore. It's a good first step. That will not last, trust me. So, rib cage movement. We have bucket handle. This is called pump handle, when the ribs lift a little bit. And if you take a deep enough breath such that you've run out of diaphragm, it's the end of a sprint, all right? And now you are maximally recovering your oxygen reservoir, right? You're trying to backfill and you're really heaving. Then it's appropriate for ribs to move because they are just the icing on the cake. You're getting a lot of respiration. You're getting the 85% already maxed out from diaphragm, and then you get a little extra surplus as the muscles of the ribs help diaphragm. Auxiliary muscles, right? Accessory muscles, excuse me. They're accessory muscles to respiration because they give that finisher. They're not the main driver of respiration. So first thing, if you take a big enough breath and you do notice, and then your sternum lifts, and then your ribs kind of flare, right? As long as you first maxed out how much diaphragm moved, then it's permissible. But for now, in particular, if you find it challenging to get diaphragm to move and to get your belly to rise, then for this purpose of this exercise, rib cage has no business moving. Get the discipline first so that you can retrain this muscle movement pattern, and then you can let the leash out a little bit. And once you've really figured out how to pressurize your core, then take an even bigger breath, especially if your asthma and respiratory system will permit. That'd be a beautiful thing. We want to get there, but it's not the first place. All right? So permissible rib cage movement to the sides and anterior posteriorly, front and back. But it's not a lift. It's just a pressing out into both. And that's the full length. And then we want you eventually to get movement down. That lateral movement from the ribs also goes all the way down the waist muscles. Okay, we want this cylinder eventually to be full 360 pressurized. But that might involve steps 2 and 3. So step 1,